So, to everybody who's joining us today, this is our live monthly podcast. We do a variety of topics on mental health and emotional wellness and related kind of topics. And today we're going to be talking about the connection between financial wellness, emotional wellness, how to manage financial stress, things like that. Just to say a couple words about us as a company, and we have a very nice, thoughtful guest speaker today, Ryan, he'll have a chance to introduce himself. But a lot of us on the panel are from a company called Start My Wellness. We are a mental health company. We specialize in helping people connect with healthcare providers. So we help healthcare providers in mental health run their own private practice, and we help patients or people in our community find kind of the right provider for them. That could be therapy, it could be psychiatric medication management, it could be psychological or neuropsychological evaluation. So basically, we help people improve their quality of life by understanding and working on whether it's symptoms or changes they need to make to kind of improve their life. And of course, a big part of our lives hi Amy, a big part of our lives for everybody is our financial impact, all of us. And so we're fortunate to have my friend and colleague Ryan Knabusch with us today, and we're going to talk about some of these topics about financial wellness, and then there's a Q&A for the attendees. So if you have questions anywhere along the way, please jump in. So and my name is Anton Babushkin. I run the company, and I'm a therapist myself, so I'll be participating as well. So maybe Ryan, if you could just kind of just a quick, couple words about yourself, and then we'll ask the other panelists to do the same.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for the invite on joining you here today. My name is Ryan Knabusch. I'm a wealth advisor at Old Mission Investment Company in Traverse City. I work with all sorts of clients, individuals, families, businesses, 401k plans. Been in the investment field for about 10 years or so, working in all sorts of different roles. But yeah, I've seen a lot of different scenarios that I think would be useful for today.
For sure, makes sense.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And maybe Amy, Kristen, if you could please just give a quick introduction.
Yeah. My name is Amy Fox. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I have a doctorate in nursing practice from Wayne State, and I've been working in this field for a couple of years, but I've been a nurse for longer. Predominantly work with patients who struggle with trauma and ADHD, and definitely can understand and see the impacts of financial stress in my day-to-day work with my patients and how it impacts them and how their life experiences also impact their financial choices. So I'm excited to join the panel and just contribute again.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I appreciate it. Kristen, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Munyon. I'm a double board certified nurse practitioner and one of the prescribers at Start My Wellness as well. Also Wayne State grad, so we'll follow Amy with that. But I am very excited to talk about this topic today. Before coming to Start My Wellness, the predominant populations I've served have all been from underserved communities where financial stress is a huge component of mental health and kind of dealing with daily wellness. So those challenges carry over in all environments, I'm finding, and really important to be very open and honest about so that we can pursue the best level of mental health care.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate it. And Bill, please, a couple words from you.
My name is Bill Bloom. I'm a licensed psychologist and neuropsychologist. And I spent a good part of my professional career working with children with severe developmental issues. Have worked with kids with autism and traumatic brain injury, which is not a developmental issue, but is certainly a catastrophic injury. And what I find and how it relates to today's podcast is the worry and concern that parents have regarding the long-term financial viability of the family and the care of their child, which is frequently something that has to carry through adulthood. And so financial matters and financial stress is part and parcel of that experience. And I'm happy to be able to join today's podcast.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for everybody. We have such a wealth of kind of different backgrounds and experiences, and so we're going to try to kind of make the most of that and think through some common challenges that people face How do we understand financial difficulty? How do we understand how that both impacts emotional wellness? And also, I think from at least a therapist point of view, how does financial wellness impact, I'm sorry, how does emotional wellness impact financial preparedness? Because many times what we find as a therapist, what I find is the more a person learns to kind of pay attention to their needs, understand their situation, understand their strengths and vulnerabilities, and work on kind of having more adaptive skills to take care of their life over time. I don't mean it's easy to do, but over time, we find many people kind of becoming better stewards of their life, whether it's their health, their financial health. So it is a learnable set of skills. Obviously, we all kind of have different starting points in different situations. So I don't mean to say it's something that anybody could just pick up in a, an easy, quick, one day kind of solution. But I think we find as mental health professionals that these are things that people can, with understanding and learning and kind of investment in oneself, so to speak, get better at, and become better at kind of managing our health and our financial health. So that's the hopeful part. Of course, the hard part is how do you do that, and how do you do that in specific situations, depending on where the person is and what their challenges are, as our kind of panelists have mentioned. So, Ryan, I thought we could start, given that you kind of see this every day, right? This is kind of these are the conversations you're having with people
Hmm.
from all kinds of walks of life. What do you see in terms of, how would you define financial stress or financial wellness? Or what kind of challenges do you see that people what do they come to you with? What are their stressors and what are they worried about? And how do you try to help them? Like, can you give us kind of a sense of what does your work look like? And then we'll invite the other panelists
Hmm.
to.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think the best way to sum it up would just be with the word uncertainty. And that has a wide range of application here. First, for some clients that I work with, it's the money that they currently have, they're worried about, obviously the number going down. For people that I just start working with that are just sort of on the beginning path for their investment journey, it's more of a how do I save money? It's a different subset of problems like what's an appropriate emergency fund? I only have, or something like, I only have one thing to prioritize. Should I prioritize paying off credit card debt, or should I prioritize an emergency savings account? My car has these mechanical issues. Do I prioritize that first? So I think it's you kind of have to take it on a case by case basis because there's no perfect answer. Each person has a different solution, and I like to view it from that perspective as it's kind of a solution because a lot of people are not aware of the options for what they can do, and so a lot of the easing of the stress is just educating these people on what their options are and how they can sort of solve their crisis.
For sure, that makes a lot of sense because I mean, what I hear you saying is, especially when somebody's like in a stressful state or they're anxious or worried,
Mhm.
being able to kind of sort of stop and think and understand may be hard to do, first of all. And often people don't even, maybe they don't recognize the options or their choice. You're basically talking about how do we make choices and decisions about our financial needs and what guides that? What principles do we use? What do we prioritize? What are our values, right? So there's a lot of decision making involved in kind of taking care of one's financial situation. And maybe sometimes people are, all of us maybe are not always as informed. Well, what are my options? Or how do I make this decision? Or what are
Mhm.
the consequences, right? Something,
Yeah,
do you see those kind of questions?
that's the key right there is what are the consequences of this decision if I choose, if say I just lost my job, what are the consequences of you know being late on a credit card payment, or pulling money out of my 401k plan, or just deferring less into a retirement plan. It's just thinking through what could happen next.
For sure, that makes sense. What about Amy, Kristen? What do you see kind of in your work in terms of what Ryan is saying, right? We of course deal with uncertainty as part of our work. That's a lot of times people come for treatment when they feel unsure of what are my symptoms, how do I take care of myself, how do I help a family member, and of course finances also play into that. Can I afford treatment? What's it going to cost? Is it worth paying for the treatment? Even if I could afford it, is this the right treatment for me? what's the how long is it going to take? What, you know what I mean? Things like that. I think those are at least some of the initial questions we hear. Amy, what do you see in terms of your work or how these problems present or challenges present, in your work as a nurse practitioner?
Yeah, I think it's not exactly answering your question, Anton, but kind of something that struck me about Ryan's comment was that it's such an individual experience. And I think it's really cool, Ryan, that you take a step back and recognize the importance of the individual. And I think in a lot of the work that we do is that personalized care, but also recognizing that everybody has different perceptions of finance and money and how it should or shouldn't be spent. And there's like a really complicated history with like the way someone was raised around money, and like what that relationship looked like for their parents. And even within like a couple's setting, having that dynamic, if one person tends to be more like frugal or tends to have a more transactional approach to money, where the other couple might use money as like a love language to buy gifts, and that's like a really important part of their day-to-day life. So, and obviously that can clash and cause conflicts. So it's really important for us as providers to, when we see these types of things unfold, to like step back and try and help people assess like, hey, what is my relationship with money, and what are the things that I value? Do I prefer to save? Do I prefer to spend? Like, what's my natural inclination, and how did that develop?
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying, especially the kind of the historical angle, right? The family angle, the back. Your example, I think, is such a good one. Where in a couple, for example, what informs those decisions, and it could be quite different, or those are really interesting, I think, ideas for us to kind of talk more about. Go ahead, Kristen. You were going to make a point.
Oh, you're fine. I think that sometimes too in NP practice as a prescriber, we're asking about finances because they can be a symptom of some of the things that we're working to treat. So when we're working with neurodivergent individuals and we're dealing with challenges with executive function or impulse control, or individuals with bipolar, sometimes those changes in the way we handle money or the dysfunction in the way we handle money can be a direct result of what we're working on together in that prescriber relationship. So I find we talk about money in a lot of the visits that I'm doing because it's part of that history. Are you satisfied with the way you're handling your finances? And are you meeting the goals that you have for yourself? Do you feel overwhelmed by your options? So I love that we're having kind of an interprofessional conversation here, because I can help them with that aspect, or I can help our patients with that aspect of symptom control, but I can't advise them the way that Ryan could. So.
Sure, right, of course, and we are kind of barred, right? Ethically, professionally, we try to stay very clear. We ask those questions. We want to know. We want to. Sometimes we, as you're saying, I think very helpfully. Sometimes we look for the way people spend money as a clue. Like if they're overspending beyond their means, sometimes there's an emotional component, or it could be otherwise kind of some kind of component where there's like a symptom of a larger issue. Maybe they're not able to control their impulses. Maybe they're using that as a way to cope with some kind of pain or difficulty, and they're using it through kind of overspending, right? So we look at these as clues and sort of signals of what's the larger issue, how can we understand the context. Of course, even if we could, if the person says, hey, what do I invest in? Typically, as a mental health professional, we say, great question. We don't want to weigh in on that, right? Ryan, you look like you're going to make a point.
Yeah. So that's I guess staying within your knowledge is always a good thing, and I run into a similar sort of barrier on my end from that perspective also. But I think part of the conversation involves the helping them understand that even though you are struggling with whatever issue it may be, comparing yourself to someone else. There's some of the 401k plan providers really push what's called gamification. So it's really turning saving into something competitive. And so when you log into your retirement plan, you see a screen that says, here's where you should be as a 35-year-old full-time worker. And it can be very daunting to log in and see that and think, well, I'm way behind. Why would I even start now? So it's like I said, it's less of a pure what do you do with the money as it is, okay, you just take a step back and stop comparing yourself to everyone else. That because everyone's unique.
For sure, for sure. That's a great point. And Bill, I would love to hear your thoughts. I just want to make one comment here about what you're saying, Ryan, is that, when I was thinking about your role as a financial, a person as a financial advisor, I think one of the things that we maybe don't necessarily always talk about is learning financial literacy could be a form of empowerment. Yes, it could feel daunting, it could feel overwhelming. Over time, kind of investing, spending time and kind of talking to somebody like you or reading things could help somebody be able to, I think, like I talked to my car insurance company today and I adjusted some things and I saved like several $100s on my policy, not because this is a commercial for that, but I'm just saying that was felt very, it was such a positive outcome. I felt like, wow, I'm empowered to like understand how the policy works somewhat or know how to make these decisions. It was a very like happy moment, not only financially, but like from a self-empowerment, being able to decide something that, I feel a little bit, I understand enough to kind of make an informed decision. So I think that element's also really important to what you're saying, that, yeah, starting may be difficult, or maybe knowing how to start, or it could be hard to kind of think, okay, well, how do I save for retirement? Or how much money will I need? But the daily, weekly, monthly steps can actually be quite helpful and empowering and kind of gratifying in a way. So, Bill, please feel free to jump in. I'm curious how you're kind of thinking about this.
Well, the conversation has brought up a lot of thoughts from a lot of different points of view. One of the things that it brings up, as probably the oldest person on the panel, is a reflection that the way that we live as an older adult is the consequences of decisions we make when we're a young adult. And that is a lesson that is lost on some young people. And I'm hoping that young people get to hear this podcast, because the idea is one of empowerment, just as Anton said, and that the consequences of the decisions when you make them when you're young really do have long-lasting effects on what your older ages will look like. I didn't know that either. I mean, it's not like, it's a special gift. I mean, it's something that you learn. And the most fortunate people are people that learn that from their families, really. But it's never too late. Obviously, it's never too late. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, Kristen, you pointed out really eloquently that there are mental health conditions that could place certain demands on the decision making and the way that you treat money and deal with money. And I would just like to add that it works the other way too, is that stress about money affects mental health as well. So there's worry and depression and anxiety and all of those things. It's a two-way street. And when we talk about the relationship of money to mental health, both of those parts of the equation really need to be addressed. One's decision-making behavior and how to spend money, but also how financial stress affects one's mental health. They both have to be considered at the same time.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Kristen, I think you looked like you were going to make another comment earlier.
Oh, I think it builds on what Dr. Bloom just said, but talking about the need for people to feel financially self-empowered lends itself to reducing the shame or the self-defeat that they have if they're not feeling that way, which is something a lot of our patients, whether or not they're neurodivergent or experiencing bipolar or something like that, experience around money. I mean, even just being stressed out and becoming depressed can change the way that we make decisions, right? We can develop an ambivalence towards the way we manage finances because we don't have that motivation. So absolutely, I think there's a strong argument for this just being that fundamental life skill that we want people to have because it lends itself to positive coping.
For sure, for sure. And I think if I could jump for a minute to Ryan, what I think you, in kind of preparing for this, you had some good ideas or suggestions for, what is that starting point? Like Bill raised the question of this like sort of longer term picture, which I think we all we hear in the news or on TV, like think about your retirement, and those are all really good ideas, and we all 100% agree with them. Applying them could be hard, or thinking like, okay, how do I plan for X amount of time in the future? It's hard to plan for the end of the year, let alone for, maybe a few years into the future. So that's not always easy to do, obviously. What do you see on like day to day? Like I think you had some nice, I was reading kind of your notes, Ryan, about ideas of like, yeah, what if I live paycheck to paycheck, for example, or something like that, right? Where I don't have a lot of savings. What do I do? How do I try to take advantage of longer term investing or learn about it? Just kind of curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the very short answer is as much as the clickbait would say is there's no get rich quick scheme that actually works. And so it's sort of boiling down to a number that's easier to digest. So I can say, yeah, that the ideal number to save on an annual basis is anywhere between 10 and 15%, but it's very hard to conceptualize that number. So I like to try and break it down into, okay, if you just start with 1%, your company may or may not match whatever that answer is, but if you just start with 1% of whatever money you make, as someone who's making $35,000 a year, that amounts to about $7 a week. And so just focusing on where that $7 a week you can cut out of your spending pattern, and saying $7 a week is what you need to target is a much more digestible number than saying you need to save $50 a month or whatever the final number
Sure.
ends up being. It's just it's easy to assign, okay, if I have $7 that I need to put into a retirement account, that means I cut back on one fast food trip for the week. And instead, whether that's,
For sure. For sure.
buying from a grocery store or whatever it is, but it's
Right.
it's easier to assign $7 to something that you spend currently and to say this is easy to cut out.
Yeah, that makes sense because I think what you're saying is, sometimes in the business world we use the word actionable, right? Something that's like you could take action on today or right now. Yeah, thinking about how do I save $7 today, especially if let's say I'm at the grocery store and I have a choice to buy a few extra items or just kind of the necessities, so to speak. Thinking about $7 is somewhat easier than, okay, by the end of the year I need this amount. How do I get that, right? So I take your point that it's kind of one could see oneself being more able to do that. And then, of course, we want to do it like on a daily, basis or weekly basis if we can. But yeah, I can see how that's like much more tangible. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Amy. Look,
Yeah, I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, Ryan, like what you just did was like a really good actionable technique for someone who is neurodivergent or has
Mhm,
ADHD of breaking down a task or something that feels really overwhelming into
mhm,
something much more measurable and digestible. And like that's what we do as therapists and providers in much different ways, but having like someone to support you and empower you like on your financial journey and breaking down some of those overwhelming things can be really helpful because like that complex interplay between mental health and financial wellness is so complicated and you almost stop before you start because it feels so overwhelming. So I think that's like a really great tip for people is like, okay, like let's just take a step back and like if you're feeling overwhelmed, let's talk about like the micro goals
mhm,
and
mhm.
also
For
like
sure.
those micro goals over time too, and starting to develop some of that goal directed persistence and having some accountability and check-in points for yourself. Like, okay, my goal is $7 a week. Do I have a structure or a framework in place for me to check in at the end of the month and be like, how many weeks this
Sure.
month did I hit my goal?
For sure. Right. That makes sense. Go ahead, Kristen.
To build on what Amy just said, there's so many good apps now too, financial like budgeting apps that are geared towards neurodivergent people. So if you are somebody who needs to see it in that micro goal type basis and needs it in a very visual way that provides immediate feedback and accountability, there's certainly options that are developed for that neurotype versus somebody who might be able to see that more global picture and work towards that long-term goal. It really shifts it to an immediacy that is needed when we're working with a neurodivergent person.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, I mean, one of the things I think about, Ryan, in terms of your comments is, well, there's so much emotional regulation that comes into money because you have to think about, okay, what are my priorities? How do I kind of not control my wants, but like sort of modulate them a bit? You know what I mean? I could say like, oh, I really want to buy this today, or I want to do this now versus, 6 months from now, or there's things every day that I think we live in such a consumer kind of focused society. Not only that, I don't mean to blame the society. I just mean like we live in a world where there's a lot of things we could potentially spend money on, and there's a lot of good advertisement for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And some of those things, might be great. Some of them maybe not. But I think it's hard every day. Like, you hear the news in the financial markets, or you think about retirement, or you think about what do I want to do today, or do I want to cook this meal, or buy, fast food. Like, there's so many choices. It requires quite a bit of like sort of self-knowledge, sort of emotional regulation, like impulse control, like in a positive way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I wonder what do you see, how does that play out in your, as, in your profession? You probably see some of those things, like you might say, hey, yeah, I wouldn't do this, or maybe try that. Like, how do you have those conversations?
Yeah, it's just trying to think through what could happen next. Like what if like you said, it's sort of understanding if you make a decision to spend, $100 to get a new pair of headphones or whatever it ends up being, then, yeah, you're going to get a certain level of enjoyment out of those headphones. You're going to get a lot of use. But if it eats into what you were planning on, this take the $7 a week again, if it eats into that goal, then you're sort of robbing your future self to pay yourself now. And it's I still have this comment in my head from a former client of mine who kind of put it very, very simply. It's you want present you to do something that future you is going to be happy about.
For sure.
And so it's sort of phrasing it in a way that you're accountable not to someone else or to some random number on the screen, but
Yeah.
to yourself in the future. So it's not just understanding what the consequences are, but fast forwarding 5 years, 10 years down the road, when that $7 a week could have compounded into, a couple of $1,000. And, when you look back 5 years from now, and say, well, I should have just saved the $7 a week instead of buying the headphones. I didn't get,
For sure.
$1,000 or $2,000 worth of value out of that.
Right. It's interesting you say that because I think as mental health professionals, we're often thinking sort of along the same lines in terms of, okay, the person wants to make a decision. Maybe it's in a relationship, maybe it's about their work. What are the outcomes? How might that play out? What will be, positive or negative? Consequences and valuing our future self is very much a part of I think we have those conversations ourselves,
Mhm.
and a lot of that is also learned. Like, I'm curious, Bill, from your point of view, is, you have a lot of experience working with kids and families. How do you see some of this being learned from a developmental point of view? Like, when can kids sort of start learning about, you know, managing their decisions and making this, we see kids all the time. Like, there's a sort of like a stereotype of a child's at the grocery store and they're saying, I want this toy, and the parents saying no, and there's like a clash, right? So
Mhm.
kids,
Mhm.
we all need to learn these skills, but these are it's lifelong learning. But when do we start, and how do we do it, and what's the good way to do it? These are kind of not easy questions, right?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is probably when the kid is first curious about what a consequence would be. And so my kids, our youngest actually turns 4 today, so my kids are now 4, 5, and 7. And so I can see the sort of differences in what they can understand and comprehend between our youngest and our oldest. Our oldest is at the point where he can understand that if I spend $5 on this toy right now, and yeah, I'll get something small, I'll have fun with it, but it's likely going to break quickly. Whereas if you see something big that he wants, it's explaining that, okay, you may have gotten $10 or $20 or whatever it is for Christmas, is just setting that aside, knowing that you aren't going to use it right away, which is fine, because you're gonna sort of reward yourself later with a bigger, a bigger gift.
For sure.
And so it's sort of explaining why you save money to begin with, and
Right. Yeah. What's
tying
the
it to
value?
something
Like,
that the kid wants.
definitely, for sure. Go ahead, Bill. I think you were going to make a comment too.
Exactly to that point is the psychological frame that we look at it is the ability to delay gratification. You are able to deny yourself something now in the hopes that what you reap in the future will be even better. And that's actually a cognitive skill. You know, Ryan, you've been talking about your children being able to do different things at different ages because it's developmental. You know, we are not born being able to delay gratification. When we're infants and we're hungry, we want to be fed right then. But as we develop cognitively, we are able to delay those impulses to be gratified. It's also in today's society, though, you have to really look at the pressures on consumerism. We are being bombarded literally 24/7 with consumerism and pressures from media and all sorts of social pressures to purchase, buy, have, consume. And it is a very difficult process, especially for young people, to really learn that sometimes delaying one's immediate needs really serves a better purpose. It's really a cognitive skill that has to be developed.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is a silly example, but it's just something that came across. My wife and I were talking just this morning about um, when we were children, what did we play with? And I mentioned that I remember when I was a child, the kids in the neighborhood had great pleasure playing with a box that a refrigerator came in from one of the neighbors. And the kids in the neighborhood played with that box. We made all kinds of things out of that box, you know?
Right.
And to think of that happening now when there's so many things you could buy
Sure.
and you can get them delivered the same day, you know, it's just a different world with different pressures.
For sure.
But the cognitive demand is that we put that aside and we delay gratification. It's sometimes very hard to do.
Well, it sounds like you're saying we need to have more people buy refrigerators so their kids can play with boxes. I love the idea.
Actually, the creativity, the social
For sure.
bonding,
For sure.
low cost,
Definitely.
absolutely.
Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think another thing, especially with our um the developing adolescents and teen population right now that is challenging is also, and just generate general population as a whole, is like substance use disorders as well, and the impact of financial strain with that.
Definitely.
At marijuana, looking at nicotine and um those types of things that are more normalized use, and those impacts on finances, but then, you know, more severe forms of like substance use disorder or more impactful, and how that really correlates to like that shame reflex with the substance, and then also getting yourself into some pretty precarious like financial positions where you feel like it's insurmountable to dig out of that hole. Because I know we've talked a lot about saving and preparing for the future and somewhat about paycheck to paycheck, but I'd imagine there's a lot of people out there that are like, you know, I'm so far in the hole, I can't even imagine just being paycheck to paycheck because I'm constantly, you know, borrowing money here to
For
take
sure.
it there to kind of fill this area of my life.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. Go ahead, Ryan. I think you were gonna add, you were gonna say something earlier.
Oh, it was just related to the refrigerator box. I was just gonna say, believe it or not, they have little kid-sized tools that you can use specifically for cardboard boxes. We have some of those for our kids. It's you know, like little tiny saws and little tiny nails. But yeah. Anyway,
Good to know.
And I understand your point, Amy. I think that's, yeah, for sure. People unfortunately can get in. I think today's world with like sort of the ease of access both of substances or like online, almost like investments or gambling. There's like so many outlets that one could potentially use responsibly or could really get a person into trouble that's not only emotionally difficult and physically problematic, but financially, it's like multi-levels of stressors. It's really hard. I remember there's a, there's some organizations in our community that do like financial counseling. You know what I mean? Sometimes they do it for free. I think that's so important because just helping somebody kind of get out of that kind of cycle, at least if they're able to just pay their expenses. I think that's such a stress relief. I think those services could be so useful. I really appreciate when people have access to them. There's a question here from one of our attendees for the panel. The question is, what's a healthy way to process anger and disappointment about my financial upbringing without staying stuck in blame or unconsciously repeating the same pattern? This is a beautiful question. What's a healthy way to process anger and disappointment about my financial upbringing without staying stuck in blaming others or unconsciously repeating the same pattern? This is a perfect question for our group. Let's get into it. Maybe Bill, maybe you could start us off. What do you think?
So you've already made the first step, and that is insight and acknowledgement how you were affected by your upbringing. Sometimes that is the most difficult part of the whole process, is really coming to realize the influences that are affecting you. And to have that coming to that question, you've already made a lot of progress. So I commend you for that. The answer, and I'd like to hear from the other panelists too, there's no simple answer, but it is a way in which you engage, maybe with a therapist, maybe with a friend, maybe just by introspection. There are many different ways to do it, but to really explore the memories of that in a way that's safe for you, and to be able to articulate alternate ways of thinking about it could be another helpful way. And to come to the realization somehow that the perhaps traumatic way that your family dealt with money when you were younger actually shaped the person you are today, good and bad. And the good things about yourself are also coming out of that experience. So I would just kind of take a broader perspective, and it's going to take some time. I'd like to hear what the other people on the panel think as well.
For sure, yeah. Please go ahead, Kristen.
I think as you, of course, process these feelings in a safe place, preferably with someone who can provide that therapeutic guidance, there's also a place for skill building, because it sounds like there is a loss of some sense of efficacy there. So getting into those resources, like Anton had mentioned, whether that be like financial literacy or working with someone like Ryan to guide your process, can help a lot to remove some of that feeling of helplessness or overwhelm or shame. Because, certainly we have to kind of examine where we came from, but part of moving forward in a successful way is getting the skills that you didn't have and being able to like reclaim that self-efficacy and to kind of chart your own path financially that might be different than the way your family would have handled money.
For sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And Amy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I really appreciate Dr. Bloom starting off with saying like, you've already done a lot of work just getting to this point, and like the thoughtfulness and insight that it takes to be able to like come up with a question like that, I think means a lot and says a lot about where you are on your journey. And oftentimes I'll talk to my patients about how like change, especially like we've been talking about, that consumer generated quick click impulse, immediate gratification culture that we live in, it can be really hard when we start to notice some of these patterns and expect ourselves to change right away. When change is a process, and like you've already done a fair amount of work to get to this point. And so like the next steps, are okay, I'm noticing this pattern. And so first you notice the pattern, and then you start to notice the pattern in retrospect, like, oh, I did it again today. Like I did this thing because I was feeling disappointed and angry and I needed to feel better. And then we start to notice the pattern as we're going through it. But we have a hard time changing that pattern. And then once we like start to notice it during the process, or like that repeating pattern, then we can start to trial different things to change that pattern, and then eventually we start building those reflexes. And then we look back and we realize, oh, that's like not my pattern anymore. I have a new pattern now. And that can feel really good. So I think it's awesome that you're like reflecting on this and trying to get to a space where you can undo some of those patterns. But there is a lot of anger and disappointment that is associated with some of this stuff.
Definitely, Ryan, I'd love to hear your point of view as well. I just want to add one idea here that I think also part of the question has to do with grieving the loss of the parents we didn't have or the way that money was treated. Like I think part of a lot of the therapy work, I think often has to do with understanding what were the influences that, yeah, contributed to our kind of becoming who we are now, and what were the difficult parts that we have to kind of come to terms with and feel some degree of grieving. And I don't mean somebody has to feel sad, but like a sense of loss of, I never learned how to manage money, or I learned poor ways of managing, or I never learned to talk about it, or I wish I did, then I wouldn't be in the situation I'm in. All kinds of things that we see as clinicians, as therapists. And it could be, there's a book that I read some years ago that talked about mourning and loss as like a liberation process, as a process through which we kind of gradually come to terms with and sort of let go, or at least don't feel as hung up on difficulties. But it's a process, it's a work in progress. It's a way of acknowledging, feeling sad, coming to terms with, changing, our actions, feeling good about our new actions. It's a gradual, incremental sort of evolution, so to speak, in how we are. And yeah, it's not easy to do, but we can do it. We could do it sometimes on our own, sometimes with, caring others. It could be with a therapist or a clinician. There are many, many ways to kind of take that journey, but recognizing and kind of working at it is part of it, right? It's a sort of a journey of 1,000 steps, so to speak. Ryan, go ahead. I don't know, how does this come across in your work? I mean, I'm sure that you see people who are kind of struggling, asking some of these questions.
Yeah, it does occasionally come up, but I think I think two things. The first is just asking the question already breaks the pattern of you know the financial or lack of financial upbringing. But also the other side of that question, or the other side of that point is that whether it's your parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever the financial upbringing includes, um, you sort of have to be careful with projecting where you're at now, the outcome with where they were at going through that process. And so it's possible that they were just making the best of it as they were going along too, without the full knowledge that you yourself may have now. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the tools just weren't as readily available now. Financial literacy still is not taught very well in any
Sure.
grade school program.
Sure.
So it's very likely that there just wasn't the knowledge, and maybe it was maybe it was a parent that inherited $1 million and just blew it all on something random, and just knowing that, okay, you're already going to break that pattern by asking this question and finding the answer for it. Whether you actually get a satisfactory response if you sort of confront that person about it, is kind of a separate point. It's just more of a, okay, that happened before, what are we going to do about it now, and go forward.
Yeah, and you make a really helpful point, I think, also about context, right? Like so I was born in Russia. My parents grew up in a very, very different society and culture and environment than we live in America. And so there's a kind of a cultural differences, family culture, societal culture, all those things play some role in terms of what we learn, how do we navigate the situations, how we even feel, is it even up to, the feeling of some of it's up to me, or I have a say in this, those are also kind of like that's a learned skill. So, okay, well, that was a very helpful question. So we have about, we have maybe like 10 or 15 minutes left in today's conversation. Are there other topics that our panel, people on our panel, what else do you see in your work day to day? What kind of questions come up around money, financial management? Like, one of the things we talked about was, I know, Bill, you mentioned, for example, how does, let's say a person has, they're involved in an accident, right? And that affects their ability to work and their ability to support themselves. There's kind of like unpredictable, I guess, events that could happen in anybody's life. Um, what are some of the things that we see as clinicians, and financial advisors? I think part of the question is also, how do we even have these conversations with people that we're helping? Because talking about money, I think, is still more or less in some ways a taboo topic. It's not that easy to talk about. People have sensitive feelings about it because it has so much meaning, right? So how do we have these conversations with each other, with our family, with our loved ones? How do we kind of get into these conversations in a thoughtful, caring way?
I worked for a long time at a medical facility. It was an outpatient clinic at a hospital. And this was a place where virtually all the patients there, it was a pediatric setting, virtually all the patients there had severe developmental problems and were going to be dependent financially on some other source rather than being able to support themselves throughout their life. And the parents obviously knew that, and that weighed on them quite a bit. And one of the things that I found that was very helpful is that the facility itself took it upon themselves to bring in experts in financial matters for planning for kids with long-term disabilities. And education is a really important part of that, educating people as to what their options are. We've talked about, I've heard words like empowerment discussed here, and it really does help people to know what is available out there, because a lack of financial literacy, lack of understanding or knowledge about what can help is really very detrimental to mental health. When you have a plan, it's much easier. It's much easier. And so and mental health professionals frequently do not bring up money matters. They wait for patients to bring them up. But in reality, money is virtually, part of everybody's life. And so maybe we as a profession need to be more preemptive and think about our patient's position in terms of how money matters can affect their mental health.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially I think now in healthcare. I think there's somewhat more of a movement to identifying the cost of things in advance, bringing up these conversations even before an appointment is scheduled. You know what I mean? For some, I think somewhat for clarity and decision making. And of course, the healthcare system is very complex, but at least knowing and thinking and understanding and grasping the realistic, kind of consequences or costs is important. And I wonder, actually, to your point, Bill, I think, my life experience is that nothing replaces having people you could turn to, having somebody you could ask a question of who has life experience or specialized knowledge is so important. Sometimes maybe we don't even know who to ask. And I wonder in today's world, like sometimes when I have a question I don't have an answer to, I'll go to like a chat GPT or like an AI tool. I'll type in the question, see what it says. I don't mean to say that that should be the answer. I just mean, I wonder if in a way, if used thoughtfully, even if we don't have somebody we could turn to, like maybe not everybody has a Ryan right now in their life that they work with or consult with, right? I hope they do, and I hope that's available to most people. But if they don't, I think that doesn't mean that their questions can't be answered or their resources don't exist. You know what I mean? Maybe sometimes it takes the courage of asking the question or whether it's the healthcare provider bringing it up or the person. You know what I mean? I think it's I don't know. I don't have an exact one point here. I just mean it's trying to think about how do we even recognize what resources are around us and to use them. Yeah.
Yeah, I
We
think
really
like,
want to hear
go ahead.
everybody's perspective, but the one remark I would say is that we're working really against a taboo. There's a social taboo about talking about your own money in front of other people and asking about their money in front of other people. And of course, privacy is very important and personal privacy is very important, but we're also working against a taboo. We really have to, money could be a taboo subject.
For sure. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
I think
Go
like
ahead,
what
Amy.
you're saying is it is really taboo. And I like something that stuck with me that someone said to me is like, clear is kind. And sometimes it can feel hard to like address taboo topics, but just being like really clear and really straightforward can be really helpful for people and almost like a relief. Because if you kind of show up in a way, and that's not a lot easier said than done, right? But if you show up in a way that's just like very clear and like compassion focused, but in a clear manner, that can almost be relieving for other people and start to, in a very micro way, start to undo a little bit of that taboo.
Definitely.
I
I think
totally
I
agree.
think it's a great point. Go ahead, Kristen, please.
I think there's value, in the relationship that we have as clinicians with our patients in just kind of framing it as one of those points where, yes, of course, we would want privacy and we feel really vulnerable about this, but we're asking because of its clinical relevance, not because there's a shame relationship associated with money, and that there's
Right.
no judgment associated with whatever the answer is. Especially I'll usually inquire on a new intake about financial habits when I'm talking about impulsivity. And so I'll tell patients, I'm going to ask you questions and they might seem really off the wall or kind of uncomfortable, but I'll always tell you why I'm asking them and relate it back to what I'm, screening for. Because I think it's really important that we understand it's purposeful and it's not coming from a place of judgment. It's part of the clinical process. But then it kind of normalizes those conversations on the follow-up for me to say, hey, how did things go budgeting? Like, how did we do with our goal on this? Or have you had any difficulty with this? And for some of our patients, these kind of impulse issues are the harbinger of exacerbations of their conditions. So it's really important that they feel very
Sure.
comfortable communicating it.
Sure. No, that makes sense. What about for you, Ryan? What do you see? Or, I mean, of course, people sort of, they will be talking with you to sort of, specifically about or intentionally about financial stuff, but maybe there's some things that are hard to break the ice on or to confront, reality, as I think Amy was saying, so helpful and can be so clarifying, but sometimes easier to avoid. Sometimes it feels easier to say, I'd rather not deal with this kind of realistic thing. But ultimately, it's, we want to know what the reality is of our situation, our lives, but it can be hard to kind of, could be bracing, I guess, in a way. What do you see, Ryan?
Yeah. So I think it's part of the conversation for me is like what is your goal with this question? Are you trying to say, do I want to project 50 years out in the future to retirement? Do I just want to think 6 months from now? Do I want to think 3 years from now? And sort of saying, yes, it's because then that helps narrow what kinds of resources are available, what kind of questions should be asked, what kind of scenarios to be aware of. And so then you can kind of fit it all together into the puzzle, and put it all together and get a more concrete answer, which I think helps people get more comfortable with, maybe the answer is not perfect. It may not be what I want to hear. If someone says, well, I want to have $1 million by age 30. Well, that's a pretty ambitious goal that, and especially if you're starting from zero at age 20, that's a long way to go and a very short time to get there. So it's sort of saying, yes, ambition is okay with some financial goals, but particularly for people who don't have any financial upbringing or any context to put it all in, it's just saying this may not be a realistic goal, but let's get halfway there by this point instead.
For sure, and I think you're also, but I think in your response, you're also saying you're recognizing sort of the positive. In a sense, you're saying, okay, this is an ambitious or somebody who has ambition or has kind of a goals for themselves. That's a really good thing. As therapists, we often sort of try to highlight or sort of reflect. Okay, it makes sense that the person has goals. Now, what's the reality, and also what are they willing to do to get there?
Yep.
Whatever the number might be. I think part of what we work as therapists is it's taking proactive steps in the real world. We want to not only recognize and acknowledge and have goals, but is the person willing or able to kind of execute on the goal, so to speak? To kind of act on the goal. That's one of the challenges I think in mental health, and maybe Ryan, you see this as well. Is it's one thing to have wishes or hopes, which we all have and we all should have, it's another thing to say, like, what am I able, willing to do, thoughtfully on a regular basis to make that happen, or to help to make that happen. That's the hard
Mhm.
part of personal growth, is the is the working at it. You know what I mean? So I think it's not that one can't do it, but that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And for me, like it's about frequent check-ins with my clients, so that way when we put together a financial plan, it's okay. What did we agree that your goal was and how to get there, and did you follow through on it? Because if you're investing money, you're sort of at the whims of the market to some degree. It's kind of out of your control. So control what you can control, the money going into the accounts, or understanding that if you, as someone who makes $30,000, can contributes to a retirement plan, okay, I can get this tax break, or just thinking, okay, if I do this, then I have these options available. But as long as I keep doing this, then these options stay available. If I stop doing this, then those options are no longer available.
I just want to, I know we're coming up short on time, and so I just want to express my genuine appreciation. I think this is an example of very thoughtful people having a very reasonable dialogue about a challenging topic. I think everybody on our panel is open to these, I'm sure Ryan, if somebody had a question and wanted to reach out to you, they could, or, Kristen, Amy, Bill. I think we want to normalize having conversations about life and dealing with, as part of the idea of this podcast is to say the things that feel overwhelming or confusing, we want to try to make them conversationable. So, you know what I mean? Sort of like we want to make them something that we could talk about, that we could manage, that we could deal, we could learn about, we could hopefully feel empowered or educated over time to kind of do something about them. You know what I mean? So that, part of the idea here is to offer real educational kind of things to people in our community and each other, ourselves, so that we can kind of help each other out and make these kind of more, help us feel like our lives are more manageable. So I really appreciate everybody's participation. It's really great to talk with all of you. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. We love your comments,
Mhm.
and you've helped us many times in the past with other projects. And so we will, yeah, please feel free to stay in touch. We can share. I'll ask a panelist, but we can share contact information if people have follow-up questions. And then stay tuned. We'll have another really interesting topic next month. We're going to talk about children and parents and emotional regulation and things of that nature. It's going to be really great. Ryan, thank you so much. If you have any kind of last comments, please just jump in.
No, I don't really have anything else to add. This was great. I appreciate the invite and for the great discussion here.
Right?
Well, thanks everybody. Great to see all of you, and I hope people enjoy. If you enjoyed the podcast, check out our website. You can sign up for our newsletter, and also feel free to reach out to us and ask us questions. We'd love to talk with you. So thanks everybody. Take care, and I'll see you soon.